Get the recording going. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm excited to say this is actually our most highly attended webinar. We had like 18 people sign up for this webinar, so I'm super pumped to be able to offer this to you guys for free. This is so cool to have such a great mind as Andrew Walker here to be able to talk to us about Cadence, increasing run cadence. So I'm just going to introduce Andrew a little bit to you. Andrew is a very well-known physical therapist that really focuses on working a lot with athletes, specifically triathletes, runners, swimmers, all kinds of athletes. And he's one of my favorite physical therapists, actually my favorite physical therapist ever. Not just because he's my physical therapist, but also he was this way before he was my PT, but he is just really committed to understanding the latest science. He spends a lot of time making sure that he gets into what is current. And so, some PTs I feel like kind of just go to school and then that's that, and they know what they know. But Andrew is forever a student of the human body, and he's very interested in the interactions between the different parts and pieces and how they work together. So if you work with him, you'll find out right away he's very different in the way he looks at things, and I find that very refreshing and well worth the energy and cost for me to drive an hour to go see him. So anyway, that's just a plug, totally unrelated. This is not about working for Andrew, but I just wanted to say, like, he's one of my favorite people. So I hope that you guys get a lot out of it. He's got a great brain, and I'm excited to be able to pick it today. So with that, I'll just welcome Andrew, and thanks for joining us for our Run Cadence webinar.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on, and it's good to see you. I haven't got to see you so much during the pandemic, and my respect for Ali is mutual. I've taken my kids to her for swim lessons, and she was awesome with them. And I've worked with, we've worked with athletes together that we're both working with at the same time. I've sent my athletes to her who are maybe thinking of taking up triathlon, but perhaps they're scared of the water or they didn't grow up swimming. So yeah, really I feel a real mutual work is going on here, and we both have a very similar intent by what we do. We don't just want to put people through sort of cookie cutter processes. We want to really truly understand what it is that helps our athletes to get to where they want to achieve their goals, and to try and stay up to date. So yeah, Ali does a great job.
Thanks. Well, Andrew, will you tell us just briefly kind of your background with PT or education and how long you've been doing what you've been doing too, so people have an idea of your credentials?
Yeah, so I'm from London originally, so I've got my my London Underground mug up here with my coffee in it right now.
Nice.
So yeah, so I did my gosh, that sent me out of focus for a second. I'm going to go back to focus. Let me see if I can get myself back in focus. Goodness.
Yeah. And you're not drinking tea? I thought if you're British, you're supposed to be drinking tea.
I drink tea sometimes in the morning first thing, and then I have a coffee if the kids have really worn me out.
Yeah, and I know his kids, so that is absolutely true.
They're pretty high energy, so they definitely keep us busy. So I'm trying to get this back in focus. I don't want to be out of focus the whole time I speak to you. Let me see. Where have I gone? Stop video. Start video. Maybe that'll fix it. Sorry.
It's okay.
The wonders of modern
that
technology.
looks better. There for a second it was better. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
what you did.
I've got two cameras. One's supposed to be a higher quality camera. There we go.
Oh yeah, you're back. Okay, good.
It gives me some ability to do some other things. Anyway, so yeah, I'm originally from London, and I lived there, did my PT school, worked in the UK for 5 years, and then my wife, she's from here, from Georgia. She's an engineer. She did grad school in London, and so we met, and it made a lot of sense for us to move stateside in terms of her work. And PT, for the most part, it can be it's the same anywhere around the world. There are some nuances to it, but I had to jump through a bunch of hoops that first year. Took me about a year to jump through the hoops the board wanted me to do, which was they wanted me to take 48 credits, college credits, including 10 of grad school. So I did that in a year, and then took the board exam, passed that, and I worked for TOC for about 5 years, I guess. And I ended up managing one of their Madison clinic, and that kind of gave me some introduction to the American healthcare system, because there's obviously a lot of differences. And then I set up PhysioWorks, and I've been had PhysioWorks now for 7 years. So I've been a PT since 2003, so a number of years. And the goal with PhysioWorks really was to work primarily with running athletes. And there were people at the beginning who said, "Oh yeah, you're not going to be able to make a business that just solely focuses on that. That you're not going to get enough people walking through the door." And I'm a stubborn person, so I said, "Yeah, I am. That's going to happen." And basically, probably about 80 to 90% of my patients are runners or triathletes, or some soccer players here and there, some other sports, but it's running sports. I get the occasional person who comes in who's just I say just, there's someone like an office worker who has shoulder pain. They're not an athlete, but they've heard friends that have had good results. So, but being that my focus is on athletes and particularly runners, I get to spend a lot of my time reading research around around running. So, I see a lot of people who go for other therapy clinics, and there's no disrespect to the other therapy clinics, but the focus of therapy clinics is going to be much broader because they're going to get your athlete, they're going to get your 70-year-old knee replacement, they're going to get your 30-year-old stroke victim. They've got to actually see a lot of patients, and when they do their continuing education, they might do something that interests them. But let's say they do a continuing education course on running, how many runners do they really get to see and apply that to? So I'm very fortunate in what I get to do. I basically, in setting up a business, I've been able to define what I want my ideal job to be.
That's great.
And the pandemic's changed it a little bit in the it's kind of backed me up a little bit on my reading and education stuff, just because we've been homeschooling the kids. So I've been homeschooling kids in the morning and then going out to the clinic in the afternoon into the early evening seeing patients. So it's quite a packed day. So I'm not going to read quite as much, but I still do a decent amount.
Yeah. And well, I wanted to start the Q&A today. I feel like a lot of the times on these webinars, people will jump in and be like, all right, now tell us why, increasing your cadence is important. And I feel like people wouldn't be here if they didn't know that it's important. It's important for that. So we don't have to spend a ton of time on like why we just should increase cadence, but that will probably come out in a lot of the questions. So I felt like I wanted to start by allowing people to jump in, with questions that they have. So we had a few people send in some early ones, and then as you're answering these, maybe you can kind of hit on some of the main reasons why increasing run cadence is important for most runners. And let's start with the first one, which is that someone said novice runners often say that they feel uncomfortable or say that they can't keep up a higher cadence without getting tired or out of breath. Do you have any tips or drills for coaching people into gradually increasing their cadence?
Okay. I want to backtrack out the question before I go back into the question.
Yeah.
So just, I think it's worth saying that, increasing cadence is a fairly nuanced thing in that, I see runners who come to me who are injured. I see runners who come to me who want to reduce injury risk and want to improve performance. Not all runners need to increase cadence. But also on the flip side, it's not as simple as saying, everyone needs to have a 180 cadence. So if you read sort of Runner's World articles, let's say 5 years ago, that was often kind of a quoted thing, like 180 cadence is what you're looking at. And that's not really true either. The individual cadence that works for someone is going to be related to their body shape and their unique physiology. So, their height relative to their leg length is going to affect what cadence actually works for them. So I think sometimes when people feel uncomfortable, it can be that they're trying to put themselves in a place that maybe their body just shouldn't go as well. But there are definitely benefits for the right person in increasing their cadence. So like if you increase cadence just 5 to 10%, you reduce vertical loading forces by over 20%. You reduce load on the front of the knee by 15%, load on the bottom of the foot by 10%. It can be quite astounding. So I get a patient who's injured and we get them on the treadmill, and let's say they've got a cadence in the mid 150s and they've got a big overstride. Just put a metronome on, take them up to 160. They get the hang of that, take them up to 165, and oh, my knee's feeling a bit better. So I think sometimes the mistake people make when they do try to change cadence is either they've already got a good cadence or that they try to make too big a leap. And probably the third thing is that they try and do it for too long in a run. So, I guess when I first started playing around with runners' cadence, I probably had runners probably try and do it too often. So I'm probably a lot more laid back with that now, and I'll tell people, okay, we want to do a small amount. We know that, you know, just a 5 to 10% change significantly reduces the vertical forces. So let's just spend 2 minutes and then have a break for 5 minutes, and then 2 minutes and have a break, and just do a little bit at a time. And that seems to work quite well and helps people to acclimatize to it. And you know, I think one of your questions, and I might be jumping forward on this because you shared the questions earlier, you know, it was, some people find that their heart rate goes up significantly when they change their cadence. I think probably that is a matter of that they're probably taking their cadence up too high too soon. So if we look at a graph that looks at increasing cadence and the sort of energy savings. So let's say at first you start up here and you increase cadence, and energy starts, you know, you start to save energy. But then as you basically, your heart rate will start to, your energy expenditure will start to go up if you get too high a cadence. So it's kind of like a U-shaped graph. Basically, I use my English graph there rather than graph. Basically, you know, you get, as you increase your cadence, your energy cost does start to reduce. So you're basically getting more economical, but there becomes a point when you start to lose economy. Actually, the process of turning the legs over quicker starts to actually ask more of the body. So that's where I say it's nuanced. It's a matter really of trying to find what is that optimal cadence at that pace for you. Yeah. And that's where you can't say everyone should run at 180. It just doesn't work like that.
For this person that's asking what tips and drills, it sounds like the answer is do intervals. Pick an interval that you can stick with that keeps you from getting tired and out of breath. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's one thing. And then making sure that you're not trying to go up too much too soon. So just progressive increases. I mean, like if you think what's 5% of 160, that's a very small change. You know, I suspect a lot of people, when they read about it online and they think, oh, this sounds pretty beneficial, they're going to take themselves up 10 or 15 steps per minute. And it actually just could be just a few strides per minute. It makes a significant difference. And what actually happens, I don't know if people necessarily realize this, when they increase their cadence, their stride length shortens. That's really one of the big sort of things that actually helps this. Let me just see if I can get this screenshot up on the screen. Ta-da, there we go. So in this graph, you can kind of see, and this picture, sorry, you can see how, I don't know if I can point to it.
Yeah.
There we go. You can see there, that person is overstriding a little bit. It's not huge, but they're overstriding a little bit relative to their center of mass, that center of mass being that red line going vertically from their ear. So when you actually increase your cadence, you start to bring the stride in a little bit shorter and bring that foot a little closer to the center of mass. Now, you don't want to land directly under your center of mass. You need to actually land a little bit in front to get an impulse from the ground. But if you have a low cadence and you have a large overstride, you get a huge braking force on you that loads up through the leg and, you know, gives people knee pain, gives people hip pain potentially. So, you know, again, that's where it's nuanced. Like increasing cadence, you know, I could have a runner that's at 160, which I might consider to be a little bit low cadence, but when you actually video them, they strike in a fairly good position. So, you know, do you try and change their gait? Because changing gait actually does have risks with it. I mean, you can cause yourself problems. I've had runners who've come in who's like, oh, you know, I read the whatever type of running book and I thought I'd change my gait. I tried to change to a 4-foot strike and, you know, all of a sudden I strained my calf, you know. So you've got to be careful in how you do it. But that's
that was actually, sorry, that was actually one of the questions that Greg asked. He said, it seems anytime I try to make changes to the way I run, and I'm going to interpret that as cadence in this, as it relates to this webinar, he says, I end up injured. How do I go about making changes and not getting hurt? So what would you say for someone like that, that exactly what you said, feels like they're trying to change their cadence, but they keep getting hurt?
I mean, the big question is why are you wanting to change the gait? So I think that's the thing. So I think sometimes like runners, triathletes get a little bit bored with their training, like, oh, how can I take myself to the next level? So I think sometimes gait changes are made that don't need to be made. If we look at elite level runners, you see some really funky biomechanics, like things that you would say in a biomechanics lab do not look economical. However, those people have built a tolerance to that over time. So you look at some of the African runners in the marathon. There's a girl, if you go on YouTube and you search Priska Jeptu, you'll find some slow motion videos of her running, and her knee falls in and her legs flick out to the side every stride. Biomechanically, you might say, wow, she's losing a lot of energy side to side and rotationally, but she's won a silver medal at the Olympics. She's won the New York Marathon. As far as I know, she had a pretty decent career in terms of injuries. I'm not in that detail, but you know, she grew up running like that, and she built a lot of tolerance. So if you're a runner who's been running, let's say you've been running since high school, and you never stopped, and you're in your 40s, changing gait might be a lot more risky than, say, a 40-year-old who only took up running in the past year, because you built a lot of tolerance to that, and that other person maybe hasn't got so much tolerance, so maybe it's a little bit easier for them to change. So I think you've got to think about, why do you want to change, and do you need to have a certain technique? Now, if you've had lots of injuries, let's say knee pain, if you've had a lot of knee pain problems and you've got a lowish cadence, when I say low, let's say below 165. I very often say below 170, below 165 is, you know, where I would start to think about changing cadence. But so if you're down there and you increase your cadence and you shorten that stride and you take some of that overstride away, that will take load off the front of the knee. So there's a very good reason for increasing it. If you're looking for performance, and you've got a big overstride at, let's say, an easy run pace, you're making your easy runs harder. So basically, having a higher cadence, striking a little closer to you, improves the overall economy of it. So again, there's a good reason for doing that. You're going to improve your aerobic capacity, but you've got to really think through, why do you want to change it? I'm not going to change it because it's of an article I've read somewhere, you know. And that's sometimes the danger. We start looking for these little things to take us to the new sort of peak of performance. But does that help? Like, I'm not rambling too much.
That makes a lot of sense. I think for someone, so it sounds like the answer to Greg would be, first of all, have a good reason for changing it. Don't just change it because you think it should, or if you've got a reason, you've got an injury you've got to address. Maybe that's kind of what you're getting at. Okay, Matt has a question. He says, for a beginner runner with hypermobile joints, so that's an interesting case. And so I guess it'd be interesting to see whether that answer is the same with someone who doesn't necessarily have hypermobile joints. But if someone has pretty hypermobile joints as a beginner, as they increase their cadence, what are effective strength exercises that can be done to stabilize the knee and ankle? It seems like for a cadence, if you're going to want to, as you're increasing cadence, do you need to be doing strength work, and how does that factor in?
Yeah, so I mean, I think to increase cadence, you don't necessarily need to be doing any specific strengthening, as long as the increases in cadence are progressive. They're gradual, so you accommodate to them. Now, that said, I think all runners should ideally be doing a couple of times a week of loaded resistive exercise anyway. So like I very often think, if someone comes to see me as a runner and they're running, let's say, 5 days a week, and that's pretty much all they're doing, and they're not doing any strength training, I'm going to get them strength training. If they come in and they're doing something, but it's very lightweight strength training, I'm going to take them and give them something heavier, because we know that and this I think goes on to another question that you'd had asked. We know that that running involves very heavy loads. Now, obviously, when you're running quick cycles of that heavy load, we can use strengthening exercises with heavy weights to build capacity to that in a very, very safe way. Because again, if you think about it in a graph, if you have load, if we have load on one side and time, when you do strength training, the load comes on very slowly and then comes off very slowly. Whereas when you run or if you jump, it's a big, quick peak of load and then it slackens off. So when we do strength training, the load comes on slowly. It's much safer to do than, say, trying to build your strength up through running. I mean, you can build your strength up through running, as we know, and you do that as a coach, right? But but strength training is a very good thing. So I'm going to put another screenshot up here. There we go. So I mean, just as an example, like walking takes about 3.5 times body weight force through your calf. If we do a single leg heel raise, we put 3.5 times body weight through our calf again. So like if you just do body weight calf raises, you're preparing yourself for walking. You're not preparing yourself for running, because as you can see there, running involves 4.5 to 8 times body weight force going through that calf. Now, you can read different papers. Some of them say 5 to 10, 4.5 to 8. It doesn't really matter. The key thing is that the load involved in running in the calf actually is really significantly higher. And then the calf there, you can see 50% of your vertical force production is coming from your calf. But how many runners are out there doing loaded calf raises? And in reality, when we look at distance running, the 2 major calf muscles, the soleus, which is the deeper calf muscle, is probably more important. So you really probably it's probably beneficial to do some calf raises with the knee being bent. But again, how many distance runners are doing that? Now, I get, like runners of all over the spectrum. I've got beginner runners who come to see me. I've got people who are doing Ironman, people who are doing ultra distance races. And I've got one of my ultra runners that I've worked with over the last few years who had long-term Achilles problems, got him doing some heavier loaded stuff. It started to get better. And I think by the time he did the Pinhoti 100, he was doing a seated calf raise with 120 pounds on his knee on one leg. That was what and that's what he had to do to help keep his calf conditioned to deal with the load and to help his Achilles problem to sort of stay at bay. And I'm going to see if I can pull something else up on here in a quick second.
While you're looking for that, I wanted to say one of the most helpful things I remember you telling me one time was that running is a one-legged hop over and over and over. And just to remember that, we think of it as being a double-legged thing, but you're just hopping on one leg over and over.
Well, that is exactly right. I want to try and find this, because I think this is really helpful for people to see. This is where I've got just tons of like little screenshots saved in.
Yeah, these are great.
I should be much more organized. That's what I need to be.
Well, we can all be.
That is not me. Let me see if I can find it. But it's a nice graph that basically just shows you what muscles work during different parts of at different speeds. And I think that's really helpful to see. So where do I find this? Let me go into my email. So I know I shared this recently with someone.
That's amazing to see what you said about the guy that has Achilles problems doing. I mean, most of us would think, oh gosh, if you've got Achilles problems, you should be avoiding, calf raises. That's sort of like how your mind works. But from a physical therapy and strength perspective, that makes total sense. You would need to make it possible to be able to handle the load. So it's not loading the tendon, it's using the muscle instead.
Well, right. And I think if you think about the historical sort of approach to distance running, what have people done? People have used light loads, and they've done lots of reps, because their assumption is, oh, I'm trying to get myself conditioned for endurance. But in reality, if you're running and you're running decent distances and you're getting your aerobic conditioning that way, instead you can use strength training to get the body used to the heavy loads that are involved in running. So
That's right.
I think I'm almost found it. I'm in the wrong place.
Okay.
So keep so did what I say? I found it. There we go.
Yay.
Did what I say made sense?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense that if your strength training for that kind of running is kind of the running itself. But if you want to get better, you're going to have to do some kind of above that. So, yeah, cool.
Here we go. Let me get rid of this. I'm going to put this over my face so you can see it big enough, people. All right. So basically, what you can see here is a graph that shows you how much on the y-axis you've got body weight force. So you can see how much body weight force the muscle produces at different speeds. So you can see like 12.6 kilometers an hour. Let's see, what's that in miles per hour? Let's see. Miles per hour. That's roughly 7.5 miles an hour. Okay. I can't remember off the top of my head what that is in pace, but I think that's somewhere around about 12, maybe a little bit under a 12-minute mile. But basically, you can see there that the top muscle that's producing force is your soleus. So that deep calf muscle. It's producing just under 7 times body weight force. The next one down on that line is the vasti, which is your quads. The quads are producing just under 5 times body weight force. Then your yellow one there is the hamstrings, and the blue one's your hip flexor, your iliopsoas. And then at the bottom there's your glute max. So really you can see, like, as a hierarchy, the most important muscle when you're running a slow run there is your calf. That's the one that's actually dealing with the most load. And then as the speed picks up, like right on the far end of the x-axis is like 28 kilometers an hour. That's I think like a sub 4-minute mile, which is beyond, I think, most of us. But you can see even just up to that transition, the calf muscle is king. It's really when you transition into those really fast speeds that it switches over to being the hip flexor, that iliopsoas, that blue line, and the hamstring is kicking in to deal with force. And then the soleus drops a little bit down to just above 7 times body weight force. And really you can see that the quads, the force that they produce is around about 5, whatever speed you run. And then at the bottom there, the glute max picks up some. So once you get to more sprinting type speeds, you are kicking the glute max in, but you can still see it like 2.3 times body weight force versus that soleus at that pace is still producing over 7 times body weight force. So it's pretty, I like that chart because it really shows you how different muscles work at different paces. But all in all, it shows you, the term I use a lot with my clients is calf is king. You know, and it's a muscle, like I say, I think that gets underlooked by training, by PTs even. So people go to PT for their knee, they get given quad exercises, they get given hamstring, they might get given glute exercises, but they get given nothing significant for their calf.
And is cadence, increasing your cadence work helpful to deload the calf or reduce the contribution of that in that graph, or is that not related?
Well, yeah, I'm not without kind of going back and looking at some data, I can't tell you for a fact what happens there. But what we do know is when you increase your cadence, you tend to go to more of a forefoot strike. So you do tend to shift load from the knee and the hip down to the foot and the ankle. So in some ways you load the calf up, but then in other ways you're reducing the vertical load. So I think it's probably a relative zero-sum game.
Okay. Just curious if that helps you at all in that graph, use more of a balanced load or whether that matters. So.
Yeah, so I mean, if I have someone who's got a calf problem and they've got an overstride and they look like they're landing heavily, I will increase their cadence, even though I know that it's going to shift them more to their forefoot. Yeah.
Okay, so another question that Matt has is from an intermediate advanced runner perspective, similar to cycling drills, and we were just talking about this before the call, where you use a much faster cadence in intervals. Are there similar exercises that can be done with running that provide similar benefits? And I feel like we kind of already answered that a little bit because you said doing intervals with your cadence, just try not to do it a lot progressively, you just go up a little.
So I think the difference here is that when we're doing intervals of cadence, we're trying to acclimatize to using a higher cadence. So gradually, maybe your average cadence per run increases and your economy improves, right? But I think when we use cadence drills on a bike, we're really using those to be more like interval training in running. So you might do a higher cadence for a minute, let's say, or whatever, and spin it up high cadence to get the heart rate up there, and then you might back off and then bring it up again and back off. That's not really the goal of what we're doing with cadence. So if you wanted to do, something similar as what you're doing for cadence intervals on a bike, really that's where you'd go and do, let's say, 200-meter sprint intervals, or a track, for example, and your cadence is going to pick up, but you're not really going. I wouldn't measure it by cadence. I would typically measure it by heart rate. Like you want to take your heart rate up to a certain amount for that 200 meters, and then back it off and recover, and then come back up and back it off. And yes, your cadence is going to go up because you're running quicker, but it's not really not using cadence to measure it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, that helps. And so you had mentioned, and I have a question, and I want to open it up to everybody else. Of course, you guys can use the chat, or you can just pop in and ask a question. But I was wondering, you said something about, not going up too fast in your cadence if you're going to want to increase it and try to do it in intervals. How do you find kind of what that perfect cadence and economy is for you? Is there a way to figure out whether you're in that place where you said it starts to exponentially go up again? How do you not do that to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really like in the sense there is a mathematical formula, but we just don't know it. So I mean, the whole, running and cycling and whatnot, they're all a big formula of load. Like, how do we control load? How do we make ourselves more economical? But we don't really have a way we can do it by just plugging some numbers into an app and figuring it out. So I think at the end of the day, it's a matter of experimenting. And that's where, if you do small progressions, you start to see, okay, well, how did that feel? I did a run there where I did, let's say, 3 or 4 2-minute intervals of a higher cadence. How did I like that? Maybe I'm not sure, so I try it again. And the second time, actually that felt a little bit easier. So maybe I try it again. Yeah, I'm pretty certain that was easier. So then I was like, well, that was a small change. Maybe I'll go up another small change. And you kind of just play around with it and see, okay, let's say I'm doing an easy run at an 11-minute mile. What cadence feels best for me at an 11-minute mile? And then you might say, okay, well, I'm doing pretty well here. My aerobic capacity is improving. My easy run feels like it should be a bit faster now. So then you get to that, you try going a bit faster and you can see, okay, did I get my speed up by an increase in cadence or an increase in stride length or a bit of the two? And then at that pace, do I feel like I want to try and play around with my cadence a little bit more? So, I mean, really, it's kind of a bit of trial and error to it, quite honestly. Obviously, when I'm doing a running gait analysis on a patient, I get them on the treadmill and I look at their speed, and I look at their cadence, and I look at their stride, and I can make some fairly informed choices about what I think maybe they should start at. But to be honest, until they actually get out on the road and start playing with it, you're not 100% sure what's going to feel best to them. So
yeah, that's true. Okay. What I thought of while you were saying this, I said I was going to let somebody else ask a question. Does anybody else have a question before I just continue to monopolize his time? Feel free to put it in the chat, but while you're typing it, I'm going to ask my question. Should you think about any specific technique aspects while you're increasing your cadence? So let's say I'm like, okay, I'm running at 160 and I want to be running at 165. As I do that, as I go to 162 or 163, like, should I be thinking, lean forward more, or I don't know, is there things I should be changing mechanically while I'm doing that too? Or is it just about trying to get my feet to the ground quicker?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I change people's gait with one cue at a time. So every now and again, if I really think it's worth them doing something else, I would have them do it, but I wouldn't have them do it at the same time. I might have them do 2 minutes of working on their cadence, have a little break, then 2 minutes on the next cue and have a little break, and then go back to cadence. To try and do cadence and do something else at the same time is a little bit harder. Again, it's a little bit nuanced. It depends on the situation, but you've got to be a little bit careful not to overwhelm your ability to sort of deal with what's going on mentally. And I think with that, it's very easy for people to kind of burn out with what they're doing and kind of get frustrated and just give up on it, when it actually could be very beneficial if they go about it the right way. And I think, in terms of cadence, the best way of going about increasing your cadence is to use a metronome. So you could try and think about, I'll turn my legs over quicker or take shorter strides, but they've done research and they've found that an external cue of a metronome beat is actually far more effective. In the same way, like, someone who's, let's say they're running and their knees drop in significantly, and that's contributing to their pain. You could, for example, try and run and think, oh, don't let my knees drop in, but it's not very effective. That's what you call an internal cue, where you're thinking about something internally. Actually, if you were running on a treadmill, and you could see yourself running on a screen, and you could actually visually see it, and you're responding to an external cue, there's a greater chance of you actually changing what's going on with your gait there. So you've got to be a little bit careful what you choose to change with your gait, because what you are doing while you're running might not actually be happening.
True. You might not be doing what you think you're doing, or you might be doing something you don't think you're doing.
I mean, it's amazing how many people come into the clinic and they're like, they think that they're a mid-foot or a forefoot striker, but you get them on the treadmill and they're a heel striker. And they're, oh, well, maybe it's because I run on the treadmill. And I'm like, well, shoot some video while you're outside and we'll have a look at it. And then like, oh, wow, I am a heel striker.
Yeah, you have your fault. Well, too, like when you get tired, you tend to heel strike. You kind of lean back and kind of end up on your heels. I know for me, I got a lot out of coming and doing a gait analysis with you, so I got to see the crappy parts of my run and also the good things. But yeah, I think so there's no general technique item that's like, when you increase cadence, always make sure you do this with your technique. It sounds like it kind of depends on each runner and what their gait looks like.
I mean, sometimes, like I say, I do. I might tell someone to increase your straightness and try and land a little bit more underneath you. Or I might try and say, increase your cadence and just try and fall forward a little bit as you're doing it. But again, that's where it gets nuanced. If you've not had a gait analysis, I think you've got to be careful that you don't try and change too much, because you might be trying to change too much to too big a degree. And going back to something you just said there about fatigue, you know, a lot of people's cadence does fall when they get fatigued. So I might get someone on the treadmill, they've got a pretty good cadence, they've got a good stride, but we know they're having pain. They're having pain later in their runs. That's where looking at their Garmin data, you know, getting the cadence on screen, scrolling through, and you can start to see maybe how it creeps down as they get fatigued. And I know it myself in a run. I might be running and maybe my knee becomes a little achy, and I just think to myself, wait a minute, what am I doing here? I've just been meandering along a bit here, and my cadence has dropped, and I'll pick my step rate up, and the knee feels better again. So sometimes it can just be like concentration and going back to maybe what you're used to. So
yeah, and it sounds like when you're making adjustments, to certainly look at the preponderance of data and not just look at the first 5 minutes of your warm up. Like, oh yeah, I'm holding 160s. I should probably hold 163. If you're at the end of your run at 145, maybe you should start there. You know, trying to hold a more constant cadence across your run.
And I've had people, like, for example, running a marathon where they're later in the race and they are starting to feel achy and stuff, and then they have that same realization. They pick the cadence up and they feel like they kind of get a second wind, because all of a sudden they're trying to run more economically. It's not that they haven't got the ability to do that. It's just they're just defaulting back and just fatiguing down into what they've done before, perhaps, and picking the cadence up just helps them a lot.
Is there, okay, I'm just going to keep asking questions until somebody has one. This is great. I love this. Is there an expected cadence drop off or a drift that you could expect over run that's normal? Or is there like, okay, we see more than a 5% drop, we better say something in this 5K or 10K? What does that look like for most people? Do you know?
Yeah, I've not really seen anyone like present any data that shows what the average drop off is, but let me see if I can pull this other slide up. I'm not sure if you can read that, but basically this is talking about benefits of cadence. So on first one, I've got hip here. Like, so it talks about the cadence, but if you go down to shin, it says here less than or equal to 170 cadence increase the risk of shin injury by 5.3 compared to when you have a greater than. Oh, not sure what that is.
Sorry, go ahead.
So basically what it shows there is you've got a higher likelihood of shin pain when the cadence drops below 170, and you've got a lesser risk of shin pain when it's above 171. So what I'm getting at there is I don't necessarily know what percentage it typically drops off during the course of a run, but I mean, just there for shin pain, you can see that 170 is perhaps a reasonable cutoff one. And there's other data out there that says 165. So that's where I say if you're doing well and feeling good at, say, 165 and and above, the odds are you don't need to make any great changes to cadence. So, do
you think that there are biomechanical differences in terms of like what people's ideal cadences? Would you say like short runners typically end up with faster cadence? Like, is there some graph like that? Just like Mike and I are both tall, we would probably want a little bit slower just because we're longer legged. There's more drag between, I don't know.
Well, that goes back to sort of what cadence pace combination works for them. So for you, for example, to try and have a higher cadence with longer legs, if you were trying to do that at a 12-minute mile, it might feel like a horrible shuffle, and actually the mechanics would get worse. Whereas maybe my shorter legged runner could actually manage a fairly high cadence at a low pace. I mean, again, looking at all these different hundreds, thousands of runners that I've worked with over the last seven years, I've got runners who are quite longer leg runners who are happy around 165 and they're not having problems and they're performing well. I've got some shorter leg runners who have cadences of 220. And having played your cadence, can you imagine trying 220?
Hashtag goals. I don't think I would ever get there.
And I don't mean 220 while sprinting. I mean, 220 while doing a low heart rate run.
Wow.
It's because they've got shorter legs and it's easier for them to turn it over. Like some of my high school girls that come in, I'll have them stand next to me and they're like, their height is here. I'm 6 foot. Their height's here, but their pelvis is level with mine. I've got short legs. They've got these longer legs, and we're going to inherently find different cadences work for us.
Do you think, and Brenda wants to know, well, no, so Brenda says she's asking for a friend. She wants to know, is there a cadence, does age affect what you should choose for your ideal cadence? Is that something that's going to change over our lifetime? Like once I'm at my age of years old, would I need to adjust my expectations as I get older?
I don't know necessarily it's going to have a great effect, other than we know that, you know, the speed of transmission of your nerves slows down as you get older. So maybe your ability to react and change is going to be harder. But we do know that certain injuries affect people at certain decades of life more than other injuries, more than other decades of life. So I think, you know, overall, you're going to have more of a chance of maybe arthritic joints as you get older. So we want to do things to be as economical on those joints as possible. So I think if anything, perhaps as you get older, maybe cadence becomes more important thing. And actually, if we look at knee arthritis and we look at non-athletes, there's been research looking into walking cadence, and it finds that there's a significant reduction in load and an improvement in pain when you increase someone's walking cadence. So this is where it's a pretty neat thing. And but running as a whole is good for you as you age. You know, you go to doctors and PT sometimes, oh, you've got knee pain. Well, why don't you just stop running? It's bad, all that pounding. It's like, no, that's not true. That really isn't. Like, we know there's good research that's come out in the last few years that when you run, you actually get, you know, at the very least, your cartilage quality is not getting worse. It may even improve a bit. We know that your intervertebral discs thicken. So, you know, running is not bad for your discs. Like, the pounding, people, the pounding, it's going to wear your discs down. No, the actual runners have thicker discs. And actually, this is a really interesting paper that was published recently. They took novice runners and they had them do a marathon training program. They ran 500 miles, including the marathon. They did MRIs before, they did MRI afterwards, and they found no significant difference in their MRIs, and none of them dropped out because of back pain.
Wow.
So basically, some of the things people have been told have not been true. So people have stopped running because of these things. And unfortunately, it's sad because we know running is so good for physical health. It's good for heart, it's good for lungs, it's good for stress and mental health. So people have had to stop because they've been given really crappy information.
That's true. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that goes around that we hear that you just kind of absorb. You're like, oh, this is what it is. So I think cadence is one of those things too, that we just feel like we know we should increase it. We don't really know how, we don't really know why, we know a little bit of why, but we're not sure how to make it happen and what it's going to do for us, if it's really going to make a difference. Can you expect people to get faster just by making a cadence change too? Like, is that something people could look forward to if they do that?
No, not necessarily. I mean, to go faster, you're either going to increase cadence or you're going to increase stride length, or some kind of combination of the two. So, but if you're looking to improve economy and actually take some load off the joints, you basically want to increase the cadence and keep the pace the same, because that way you're going to shorten the stride. Now, overall, if you're running more economically and let's say you're following kind of an 80-20 principle, 80% of your running is easy and 20% is hard. If you've got a more economical cadence for 80% of your run, you're going to improve your aerobic capacity. So in the grand scheme of things, yes, you're going to end up running faster.
This is good. I'm writing down these little takeaways, you guys. So that's really good. So you're saying instead of being overjoyed that you've increased your pace, or I guess decreased your pace, you should be trying to keep the same pace with a higher cadence and watching that as you're running, as you're doing that. So, okay.
Yeah. And I mean, if I look at myself as before the pandemic, I was swimming about 4 or 5 days a week. That was kind of my form of exercise. And then pandemic shut the pools, so I took the kids out on their bikes and I started building up my running. And whenever I'd gone through Couch to 5K programs before, I think I basically was running like I was in high school still. And I would always pull a calf muscle, and it's like, kind of the physician heal thyself. I wasn't necessarily great at listening to my own advice. And so this time, trying to go through the pandemic, I really tried to adhere to more of like this 80-20 principle. And I think you probably used this, similar yourself, where heart rate based, 80% of my training is low heart rate zones, and then 20% is going to be higher, more of a tempo and above pace. I try not to do too much exercise that's kind of in the middle, and just doing that and making sure that my run dynamics as such is decent for my easy running. I definitely have improved significantly over the last year and a half. No speed demon, but I've now got my 5K but like down to 29 and a bit minutes the other day. So that feels like an
That's
achievement.
awesome. Do you think that the 80-20 principle, I think that's what you just said, applies to cadence changes also? 80% of the time you're running, stick with your old cadence, 20% introduce the new one. Is that what you're saying? Or no?
No, not really. I'm just saying, like, 80% of your training should be easy runs. So that's probably the runs where you want to, if you're going to play with your cadence, you want to play with your cadence there, because that's the bulk of your running. And I wouldn't necessarily define a certain split in how much of a run you should do on playing with the cadence. I maybe say 2 or 3 minutes of working on cadence, have a break for a while, and then come back to it, so you're not driving yourself nuts, and you give yourself a little bit of a chance, in a sense, to compare. Because when you run with that higher cadence for 3 minutes, it's not enough perhaps to fatigue yourself, but it's enough for you to say, oh, actually that feels better on my joints, or feels lighter on the body. And then you go back to your old cadence and you're like, oh, it doesn't feel quite as good. I'm going to still stay there and have a break from cadence, but then when you go back to that new cadence, you're like, oh, that does feel a bit better. And gradually you then start to accommodate and acclimatize to that, and your cadence overall starts to pick up to where maybe you do longer intervals, and you might do those longer intervals naturally, or you might still define them more. But in the grand scheme of things, your average cadence at that pace increases.
Yeah, and I think it also does a lot for you mentally. I had an athlete I was working with this last year, and we had all kinds of really weird permutations of how long they were going to be working on their cadence and what their rest intervals were going to be. And like there was these like 5 times 130 with 30 seconds in between, and then a break of 3 minutes, and then we had this other one that was like 7 times 4 minutes. It's just like, and it was good for him here, because instead of just going for a 20-minute run or 30-minute run, he had all these little things he was supposed to be doing. Like every minute and a half he was supposed to be changing. And I think that's one of the understated things about working on cadence is it gives your brain something to do. And I think that as a coach, I think it helps mimic too what you're going to be doing in a race. You're going to be getting out there needing to manage all of this data input that's coming into your head. And if you've gotten used to going for brainless runs, that's not going to serve you. So I think that's another benefit of cadence work, is it keeps you engaged in your daily runs.
Well, I think it is. And I think from a coaching perspective, it's also a matter of knowing your athlete and asking the right questions. Because I've had a couple of patients recently who are very, very data focused. They're very analytical. We live in a town of engineers. I'm married to an engineer. We expect that to some degree, but basically they'd gotten burnt out by data. They basically had lost, they actually were getting slower, and they were getting overly stressed by the focus of the data. So I think, it's good to have data. It's good to understand things like we're talking about today, but sometimes it's okay to just step back and just do a run where you just listen to the birds.
True. That's a good point, and that's a good place to stop. I like that. That's really true. Yeah, enjoy your runs. That's anybody who knows me knows that's a huge component of why I'm involved in coaching and in triathlon and athletics. It's just the enjoyment of it. So that's a good reminder. We don't have to all be so serious all the time. Well, this is so good, you guys. I wrote down, okay, these are my takeaways. Now you all can know what I've been writing this whole time. Okay, number 1, if you're going to make cadence changes, have a good reason. That was takeaway number 1. Have a good reason for doing it. Number 2, do it progressively. Don't go nuts and just go up 10 beats. Number 3, do it in intervals. So pick some small intervals that you're going to work on. Number 4, pay attention to how you feel and the resulting speed, i.e., he said, keep the same speed with a higher cadence as you're starting to do that. And number 5, I guess it's the same thing. Keep the same pace, but pay attention to how you're feeling and what that feels like. Oh, and there we go. Number 6, try and lift heavy twice a week. I missed that one. That's a good one. And Yes. For those of you that can't see that, it's in huge letters and it's getting bigger and smaller on the screen. Yeah. Okay. So that's number one. So I feel like we need a follow-up webinar in the fall to see who here on this webinar has taken that advice and who has done that. So good. Well, if anybody else has any follow-up questions they were too shy to ask during the webinar, always feel free to email them to me at info@readysetsweat.net and I will send it to Andrew, or you can always email andrew.walker@physioworkshsv.com. You can ask him directly, but it's a great opportunity to be able to just talk to Andrew a ton. And there's one new message. Let me see what it is. It's probably someone saying, thank you. Oh, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Andrew. Great information. So thanks, Andrew, so much for coming and sharing all this. I feel like this webinar could go on for 4 hours, but I guess most of us probably need to eat lunch or something. But we will hopefully get to have you back and talk more. There's so many things we could ask you that you just have such a great wealth of knowledge on. So thank you.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Take care.
Okay. And let me see here. Let me stop our recording. Thanks for joining the recording, everyone.